Functional skills has been going through a period of reform for the last 2 years. The Department for Education wanted to ensure that these qualifications were fit for purpose. To this end, they talked to employers about the skills needed from their employees for them to achieve in the workplace. As part of the reform, the purpose of functional skills has shifted somewhat, so it is now more focused on progression in employment and progression through technical education. The guided learning hours for functional skills have increased from 45 to 55 hours per subject per level. This increase in guided learning hours, however, does not come with an increase in funding. In terms of timelines for the reformed functional skills, there are 2 key dates. The first is the 31st of August 2019, which is the last registration date on the legacy functional skills. The 1st of September 2019, therefore, is the first registration, first teach on the reformed functional skills. Now, these dates are hard and fast and unfortunately will not change. In terms of registering learners, learners need to be registered on the legacy qualifications prior to the 1st of September 2019, as any registrations on this day or afterwards will be automatically registered on the reform. There will be, unfortunately, no availability of a late registration for learners who failed to meet the deadline for registration. In terms of the qualifications itself, it is possible for a learner to do legacy and reform at the same time during the transition year. However, that would have to be split between the subjects. So a learner could do legacy maths, for example, and then reform English or vice versa. They would not be able to do elements of the English on legacy and reform, as there is no transference of credits between the legacy and the reform qualifications. What this means is that the learners would have to do reading, writing and speaking and listening either on the legacy or on the reform. What is key with this is the cut-off date of the 31st of August 2020, and that is the date when the transition period ends, and that is the final certification date on the legacy functional skills. If a learner hasn't completed their legacy functional skills at this point, they will have to start again on the reform. In terms of English, this is more problematic because they would have to have achieved all 3 elements, the reading, the writing and the speaking and listening. So they cannot transfer any of those elements across onto the reform qualification thereafter. One of the major changes with the reform has been the removal of spiky profiles for functional skills English. Spiky profiles are where a learner could do different levels within the qualification. For example, level 1 reading, level 1 speaking and listening, and level 2 writing. As part of the reform, this will no longer be allowed, so a learner would need to be registered and take the assessments on 1 level only. Pearson has been doing a lot of work to ensure that its assessments are accessible for the majority of learners. Since 2018, we have been carrying out a study on appropriate context for learners doing functional skills, and I've worked with a number of tutors and a number of centres to ensure that our assessments are relevant to the needs of these learners. In terms of maths, we've also been working with language experts to ensure that the language on our maths assessments are appropriate for all learners, including ESOL learners. As part of the work on context, we also looked at the layout of the papers for functional skills maths at level 1, level 2. For the paper-based papers, these are currently set up where there are 3 sections where each section has a separate context. Moving forward, we've taken the decision with tutors and centres to change this so that it mirrors the setup for the on-screen, where each question is an individual context. As part of the entry-level English assessments for writing, learners will now have to do a spelling test. Now, this is a discrete spelling test, and is based on words that were published by the Department for Education. In total, the learners will have to do 10 spellings per level, per test. Now, the words chosen by the Department for Education were chosen phonetically. However, the assessment itself is not phonetically based. As part of the reform of functional skills, Pearson has agreed with Ofqual that we would have a transition period of 12 months, which would allow for the dual running of the legacy qualifications and the reform qualifications. This would give learners the opportunity to complete the legacy qualifications if they have been registered prior to the 1st of September 2019. As part of the reformed qualifications, learners will not be allowed to use dictionaries or spell check facilities on the English writing papers. However, learners will still be allowed to use dictionaries on the reading papers and on the maths papers. As part of the reformed functional skills maths, learners will have to take a calculator and a non-calculator paper at every level as part of their assessment. The non-calculator paper will make up approximately 25% of the time and the marks on each paper. These assessments will be sat at the same time. There is a concern that the reform of functional skills might have an effect on timely completions within apprenticeships. What Pearson are suggesting is that apprenticeship providers make a decision regarding which of the qualifications to register their learners on as soon as possible for learners starting on apprenticeship programs from roughly July 2019 onwards. You have the choice of registering learners at that point on the legacy qualification, or wait until the 1st of September and registering the learners on the reform qualification. In terms of the legacy qualification, that might be the best option for you, as your staff are fully aware of the standards necessary. However, because there is no transference of credits and because there is a hard and fast cut-off point of achievement, if the learners do not achieve by the 31st of August 2020, they will have to start their functional skills again on the reform. Now, the difference in content between the legacy and the reform means this will not be a straightforward transition for those learners, and therefore it might have an adverse effect on timely completions and the ability to access Gateway. As part of the reform of functional skills maths, underpinning skills have been introduced across all the levels. In the legacy qualifications, it is taken as read that if a learner could find the area of a room, for example, that they can actually multiply two numbers together. However, as part of the reform, there will be standalone questions that will actually address their basic arithmetic skills. Now, the underpinning skills will actually form 25% of the assessment across the calculator and non-calculator papers. Prior to the first teach of the reformed functional skills, Pearson will have 2 practice papers for each level and subject of the reformed qualifications. Now, these sample assessments for level 1 and level 2 will be available both paper-based and on screen. In addition to this, there will also be a mini test which will allow the learners to practice the new on-screen functionality that is necessary as part of the reform. As part of the reform, we will be updating the content on Exam Wizard. We'll be adding the sample assessments that we are creating, but we will also be mapping across approximately 300 questions per subject so that there is a continuity of service for you there. We know that it's important for your learners to practice their skills using questions that are similar to those on the live assessment. And that is why we feel it is important for us to map these questions across and ensure that you can do practice questions with your learners whenever you need to. As part of the reform of functional skills, there will be a continuity of service on Results Plus. So you will still be able to access your legacy learner results and your reform learner results in the same way. And you will still be able to access the behind the grade information you need to help your learners achieve. Pearson has put together a support package that will help you and your learners achieve through our exemplar resources, our schemes of work, and our training events.